It's Wednesday, the 11th of October 2017, and it's time for the Ask TCW podcast live. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Ask TCW podcast. My name is Tina Taylor and thankfully we are back in our rightful place of Wednesday evening. So to join me tonight to answer the questions that have been sent in by you guys, we have our regular panellists of Andy Haywood.
Evening.
Antoine Marie-Jeanne.
Good evening.
And our special guest tonight is Chris Ellis.
Hello.
Hello, Chris. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. How are you guys?
Yeah, jolly good. I think we're...
Very well, thank you.
Yeah. Apologies for our tardiness, all down to me and Bill Gates. I'm going to blame Bill Gates on this one. But we're here now, and we are going to kick off with some questions. So, Chris, I think... While we've got you, we'll let you sort of introduce yourself first of all. So we'll start off with a question that will sort of give you a chance to talk about what you're doing at the moment. And Casey Thorpe has asked, what involvement do you have with Team GB?
Okay, well, I'll try and be as brief as possible, really. But, I mean, on a daily, weekly basis, it's really about populating the Ice Hockey UK website and keeping the social media going with content. And obviously, at a time like now, there's very little live action going on for Great Britain. The tournaments at all levels don't start until December, and that's when we get really busy, really. So it's just a case of now, is people may have noticed if they follow any of the GB or Ice Hockey UK accounts, it's things like schedules are starting to get announced, and some of the next coming up will be a GB under 18s women's squad, and there'll be an announcement that that GB under 18 women's are playing in a tournament here or there. So it's this kind of year where the tournaments ahead of the World Championship get announced. So while there's certainly the big ones like the men's women's tournaments that they come later in the year, but that's kind of when it's it really gets busier from that point of view. I mean, one of the bigger things in the quieter points is finding ways to get GB in the media with a difference. And more recently, we had a good one on Blue Peter. A few years ago, it was a link up with Williams and Formula One. And sometimes those fall into your lap. Sometimes you have to go looking for it. But yeah, I mean, the majority of the busy time comes at World Championships. And, we have 5 of them effectively, with the 18 men, the 18 women, the 20 men, the women and the senior men. And then it's all a case really of building a team to go to various events, a photographer, a videographer, then obviously working with the outlets, like we work very closely with the BBC for commentaries and for getting video content online. Then it'll be a case of working with local papers. The Nottingham Post and Sheffield Star are great for taking stories around big tournaments. Working with the clubs, the Steelers are fantastic, led by David Sims, getting stuff online. And then there's local radio, just a snippet, let's say, of Robert Farmer on Radio Nottingham looking ahead to the World Championship can be massive, just to raise awareness of the national team. So it's kind of building those relationships. But one of the biggest stresses, I've got to be honest, that's kind of come my way in recent years is the media budget, because no one really gets paid to come and do the job when these people come away. People like Dave Burnham, who does the video side of things, Dean Woolley and Carl Denham now, and Colin Lawson on the photography side of things. But there's a budget because they need to stay in hotels, they need to have flights, and there isn't a big amount of money in Ice Hockey UK. I think that's kind of well known. And I would say my biggest stress these days is getting a budget that the Ice Hockey UK board will be happy with, but we can provide a level of service that not only fans want to see on a sort of Ice Hockey UK TV side of things, where we bring you the features, but to satisfy the national and local media demand. So hopefully that kind of, in a brief nutshell, has kind of answered that question.
Right, okay, yes. Now, we have had questions that are sort of specific more probably to yourself, Chris, and also some general questions. So I'll try and jump around a little bit so we can bring the guys in as well. So I'll go to Greg Barlow's question next. And he says, what are Chris and the panel's thoughts on the under-23 rule now that we are partway into the season? And do you think it will help the senior GB team in the future? Andy, we'll come to you first on that one.
Yeah, I think it's been really quite successful from a Panthers point of view. Obviously, I know that other clubs have obviously also fallen in line with the rules, but I've not really seen a great deal of many of the clubs yet because we're so new into the season. But I think so far it's boding well. Obviously, with the interviews that yourself had with Tetlow and Kelsall there. They seem to be enjoying the chance of training with the team and getting experience in games with us, not necessarily getting masses of ice time, but it's helping them for when they go back down to the EPIHL and play their games at the weekend. So I think ultimately it's a good decision. I think it's a right decision. I think it's a good bit of progress looking forward to the future. And I think ultimately, it can only make the men's and senior sides better. Well, obviously better than it looks currently for the future. Having these players playing games and train with these top quality players that are in the squads, they're only going to get better themselves. And obviously, we've spoke before on podcasts about where are the next David Clark, where's the next Colin Shields going to come from? Well, this type of rule that's been brought in, hopefully is going to produce those type of players so that when the inevitable happens and some of the older guys do step down and retire from hockey, there's not a massive void that needs to be filled. Ant,
anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think Andy's summed it up perfectly. I mean, it was a question I asked of Neil Black at the Q&A last season. We go back years and years. When I first started becoming a regular, a young lad called Robert Lakovic was just breaking into the team. This is prior to his days in Manchester. So historically, we've always had that at the Panthers. We've always had the kids coming through, and that sort of dried up over the last couple of years. So for the league to introduce this under-23 role, I think was huge. And I can only speak for the players that we've seen so far, but obviously you've got a couple of really top prospects up the M1 in Sheffield, but I'm really liking the look of what I've seen of our lads so far.
And Chris, I mean, you may have a sort of a unique perspective, I suppose, with your relationship with the senior men's GB team. So, I mean, does that? Do you? I mean, would you have anything to add? Because as Ant said, I think Ant summed it up. Andy summed it up pretty well there.
Yeah, I think he has, but. I mean, I'm not going to bring all doom and gloom. I mean, I think it's definitely got the right intentions, but I think that these owners and coaches and GMs have got to want them to play. I mean, Nottingham are doing it exactly right. Sheffield are doing it exactly right at the moment. Other clubs, perhaps aren't so. Hearing from the players, like you said in their interviews, I think they're just ecstatic and will gain so much from training with these quality players. But as long as they play, my concern is they'll get older and older, and will they get onto a position to be on a top line? David Clark came through at a time when there was less imports in the Elite League. Robert Lakovic started his progress. He went down to the next level, which was a much better level than it is today. You can't really put players into the second tier now and think, well, they're going to learn their trade, because that level has been totally ripped apart in successive years. Well, not successive years, but with first the demise of the BNL and then of the EPL. So obviously it's a lot lower than we were used to. But these guys will train with Nottingham. If we've seen, they'll get the ice time, and hopefully that will be across the board. I mean, I do feel, and as you say, I do have a unique perspective, and I'm not involved in the Elite League anymore. So from that kind of side of things, I look from the outside. But I do think there's some owners and teams that want to help the GB national program, and there's others that perhaps don't so much. But it's I like to look at both perspectives, and And obviously these clubs have tickets to sell. They've got a product to sell, and they think that 14 imports is the way forward. And I look at the products I'm seeing now in Nottingham and the games that I'm seeing. They are fantastic. This is the best era for EIHL by bar none. It almost looks like the Super League days. The Panthers squad has scary amount of talent. But do I think it's good for Great Britain? No, I don't think it is. And, your GB players, your middle of the pack GB players that perhaps 5 years ago were first, second liners are now third, fourth liners. And, they'll go away with GB now and they won't have had as much power play time. They won't have had much ice time, and suddenly they're going to come up against tough nations. So, I do think there's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I know I'm kind of going away from the under-23 question, but it's kind of part of it with there's so many imports now in the league. But with the under-23s, I think the Elite League have done the right thing in introducing that rule and showing that they are keen to develop the talent. I mean, Sheffield started, didn't they, with Shudra and Kirk a couple of years ago. Again, from a personal point of view, if I was the Elite League in the summer and the demise of the second tier, I would have got together and got all the clubs together from across the country and said, we want to start an EIH2. I don't know, 8 imports, 6 imports, 5 imports. And I think you might have found that some of the clubs at the lower end of the Elite League would have perhaps liked that. You might have still got people like Telford. You might have got other clubs like Swindon, perhaps. And you may have seen an 8-8 split. It's just one thought that I had, where I think the Elite League could probably have said, right, we're going to develop British talent. We're also going to put on a great product for our supporters. And I do, and maybe it's too late now, maybe because all these clubs have dropped away into a smaller import league. Perhaps it will never happen. But in the summer, maybe they could have struck. But, I don't go to meetings. I'm not involved now. Maybe there was some thought. But to me, that would have been a good way to have the top flight, 14 imports, but to have a lower Elite League Tier 2 of whatever, 6, 8, 5. We'd all disagree.
Oh, Chris, I think you've just raised a massive discussion topic for another day. That's just...
I've gone on, but I shut up. So.
Yeah, well...
Can I just jump in and ask
absolutely, yes, please do.
Question? Because obviously you've touched on the demise of the second tier in the UK hockey. Do you think we're ever going to recover from this? Do you think there'll be another league come in between the NIHL and the Elite League? Is that something you can see happening?
I don't know. I mean, you may have been aware that, led by Richard Greaveson, Ice Hockey UK chairman, who's very proactive, and he's desperate for unification, which he's spoken about a number of times, of the governing bodies. That's another situation for another day. But he wanted a second tier league with slightly more imports, I think, than there is now. Perhaps not the amount of imports that I'm talking about, 5 or 6. But it's hard to see, isn't it? I mean, it's again, but who? I don't think the governing bodies want to form a league with 4 or 5 imports. I think they perhaps want to look for less imports. As I say, maybe it's one for the Elite League to look at, having 2 divisions, because clearly I don't think it's a secret that some of the clubs at the lower end of the scale in the Elite League were not keen on 14 imports. I don't think, I think they, in some of the Scottish clubs, made that quite clear. And, you do wonder what other teams, not so long ago, you'd got Bracknell in the Super League. You've got Basingstoke in the Elite League. You look at what Milton Keynes have done. They've made the step up from last year, 3 or 4 imports, to what they are now. So I suppose in answer to that question, yes, it can be done, but it needs somebody with the drive and determination to make it happen. And whether that happens within the Elite League, whether that happens from Ice Hockey UK or the English Ice Hockey Association, that's a big question. Maybe they all need to work together. And I've been part of many things over the year. I've seen various Ice Hockey UK chairmen try and work with the EIHA, try and work with the Elite League. And hey, I'm not saying there's blame on one side or another, because there's blame on lots of sides. But yeah, have they gone too much one way? I don't know. But I suppose a prime example is Milton Keynes. They've gone up from a few imports in the EPL last year to 13, 14 now, and they're holding their own, aren't they? So yeah, it can be done.
Before we go any further, and I'm not going to ask this question yet, I am going to come back to it because it will take us off on a little bit of a tangent, I suppose. But should you wish to get in touch with us during the show, you can do so, and the best way to do that is on Twitter. If you tweet us at CatsWhiskersTV. Chris Lavelle, friend of the show from over in Belfast, has been in touch, and he does have a question, which, as I say, I will ask. Don't let me, chaps, if I do get distracted, then don't let me forget without coming into that question. But yes, I'm going to stick with the ones we've already had for the moment. I think we'll stick with GB, I think, for the moment. And Amanda Barden has asked, what are GB's expectations for the Worlds in 2018? So I suppose, Chris, if you want to open the floor with this one, and we'll see if Ant and Andy have got anything they want to chip in.
Well, I'd be happy if they finished 5th out of 6. Just to stay up would be a fabulous achievement. They won't be going with those expectations because they have aspirations of going even higher, and obviously momentum can build. If you look at the teams that they're going to play, you look, for example, Poland is one of them. They've beaten Poland countless times in friendlies before tournaments. They ran Hungary close when they got relegated in actually the arena where GB are going this time around. If you look at Italy, the last time they played them was in the Olympic qualifiers a few years ago. And if it wasn't for a first period of consistent penalties where GB took penalty after penalty, I think they were 4-0 down. They got it back to 4-2. That could have been very different, and GB could have been the next stage. So they've run Italy close. Korea, they're not in the group. They're in the top flight. But a few years ago, GB beat Korea. Slovenia are obviously going to be a top nation. Kazakhstan, GB have not played for a while, but they have lost the last couple of times they've played them, including when they were in Hungary, when they had that relegation in, I think it was 2013. So I think their expectations they'll be happy to stay up. But such is the way. 2 teams go up from this group to the top flight. So all they need to do is sneak an early win against one of the better teams, and then a couple of games go to overtime between some other teams and penalty shots, and the group suddenly opens up. So I think what I'm trying to say is I don't 100% rule out promotion, but it would be a massive achievement. But at the same time, staying in the group with what they'd probably need, 3-4 points, would be a great achievement as well. So I'm really looking forward, because it's been too long since they've been at that second tier. From my point of view, the media attention will be a lot bigger. It will be a lot grander. But yeah, I mean, staying up is the main aim, but who knows what could happen.
Now, I know we've chatted in the past on this very podcast about maybe the sort of apathy towards Team GB, but I think there was a bit more enthusiasm following that promotion. Andy, I mean, we'll just touch on what Chris has just said there. Promotion, is it wildly out of GB's grasp, do you think?
I think on the face of it, yes, it is. But on the face of it, so was Panthers qualifying from a CHL group. It's one of them things. I looking at the schedule, I actually think that the games that GB have fall in the right order, in the sense that realistically, Slovenia is probably going to be the favourites and the toughest team, and we played them first. Mm-hmm. Like Chris said, if you spring an upset in the first game where realistically, a lot of the Slovenian players are not going to know anything about our game, about our style, about the players. Who knows? We've seen surprises before, both nationally and at club level for every team. And I just think if we can get, like Chris said, if we can get a win on the board early doors against either Slovenia or Kazakhstan in the first 2 games, and all of a sudden you sort of think, well, you've played at a standard and won, so the momentum all of a sudden comes back with the Team GB. And obviously, with that in mind, and again, there are no easy games as such, but obviously when you're going into teams that are more suited around your level, like Poland and Hungary that we've come close to before, and even Italy, a push as well, I'd say. You would go into games thinking, look, we've beaten Kazakhstan or Slovenia. Why? Let's go into this game full of confidence and see what happens. And all of a sudden, like you say, if you keep picking up wins and picking up points here and there, then all of a sudden you could be looking at finishing in second place at worst. So it is wildly, it's wildly unrealistic on the face of things. But like I say, we've seen these type of things happen before. And at the end of the day, particularly with the World Championships as well, because they're played, so close together within, I think it's 6 days from the start of the tournament to the end of the tournament. You've just got to be hot for a week, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's not, unlike the Elite League season where you can afford to have a bad spell at some point, and you drop a couple of points, and you pick them up later on in the season, and you don't really think about that bad weekend again. Obviously with this, you've got to bring your A game to every match. You haven't got time for dwelling on past results, because you're almost straight back onto the ice to play your next game. So if the players can be hot for a week, and play the way that we know they can, and play out of their skin against teams, then I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility, no matter how improbable it is.
Ant, anything to add on to the back of all of that?
No, because Andy nicked what I was going to say about the CHL. I will just say I'm looking at our schedule, as Andy was talking about it, on the IHF website, and unfortunately the main article is about a certain Ukrainian goalkeeper.
I saw that.
a rising star, so we will just move on, shall we?
Yeah, we'll leave that one exactly where it deserves to stay. I think we'll move on to a sort of media leaning, if you will. British ice hockey, best kept secret, and all that blah blah blah. So we'll come to a question that was sent to us not long before we actually started recording, actually, and this I've only got. Where is it? Rich McCaig. And Rich says, I've seen a highlights clip from the BBC showing Scottish teams. Is a BBC highlights or TV deal show for full league a possibility? I've seen this sort of rolling around a few times. There does seem to be a highlights show that BBC Scotland have promoted, I believe. I suppose I'll come to you first on this, Chris, because it does specifically seem to be the Scottish teams. So, how do you know how that dynamic works in terms of north of the border BBC and us down here?
Your probably best bet would be Craig Anderson, who's obviously now one of the Elite League media officers and is very much involved in the media in Scotland. But I do have quite an insight into the workings, because one of my freelance jobs is working on the BBC Sport website in either a couple of capacities. Sometimes I will perhaps cover a region and write stories about a region. For example, today I was working as the East Midlands regional journalist. The chap Owen was off for the day, and so my job was to write stories. So I wrote one about Corey Nielsen looking back on last night's game. I think I wrote one about Notts Luke Wood signing a new contract, a Leicester Tigers story, and another one. But then sometimes my other job would be to sub people's work from across the country. Without boring everyone, there's a main hub in Salford that deal with a certain amount of sports and levels, and the hub I work for is in Birmingham, which deals with a different array of sports. But it is very much on a case by case basis. So I know that Belfast Giants got into a sort of production with BBC Northern Ireland, led by Nigel Ringland. I think it was called Face Off. I haven't seen it this year, but that was certainly very, very successful as well. There was the one that you're mentioning in Scotland, but. I've seen a few, and it brings me on to a good point, and I've seen a few real sort of angry Panthers fans after sort of the CHL wins saying, why is this not on the BBC Sport website? Why is it not on the main homepage? And I'm a massive, massive advocate of getting publicity for ice hockey and for the Nottingham Panthers, obviously with, my hometown club. But I'm also a realist, and one of the biggest interesting debates was I saw some people saying to the BBC Sport Twitter account, why have you not really touched on us beating Burn, but you're showing Sheffield Steelers beating us in the last second, and you're biased, blah, you know, and all that lot. And I can see what they're saying, but if you kind of step away from it and think of let's say your average Joe Bloggs in Birmingham, you know, let's be honest, they don't care that Nottingham Panthers have beaten Burn. It doesn't mean anything to them. It means the world to us, but they perhaps don't comprehend really what it means because they don't follow the sport. So, you know, Burn could be the best team in the world. They could be the worst team in the world. But what they do relate to as a sports fan, let's say, is that a team has scored in the last second to win a game, which is remarkable. You know, there was 1 second to go, and I think it's, you know, it's kind of stepping outside the box. I mean, you know, don't get me wrong, I'd love nothing more than Panthers and ice hockey to feature on the sport pages, and quite often they do. I mean, sometimes you do have to look hard, obviously, because stories just are on the ice hockey section, which is quite a few clicks away. But you know, I do see the thinking of, look, last second goal. That's remarkable, you know, like crazy own goal from 60 yards in a football field. That's remarkable. But a team, you know, winning which is a minority sport, you know, we have to accept that, sadly. Beating a massive team, it would interest ice hockey fans. It will totally interest us in Nottingham. But would the reader in Birmingham, what would they probably rather see? A last second goal or something about a team, you know, winning in Europe? It's probably the last second goal, and that kind of pains me to say it. But I just think that's the way it is, and you know, and I get that little bit of an insight. But you know, the BBC are keen to do more ice hockey, and that's been shown by them showing like the Challenge Cup final, the playoff weekend. You know, I'm lucky that when I go away with the GB, they will take commentaries from the women. Seth Bennett joins us and does commentaries from the men's tournaments. You know, and I'll say to them, if I send you a match report, if I send you photos, send you videos, and they will use them. Some clubs have got great relationships with their local BBC radio stations and online people, and some not so much. So, you know, there is kind of inconsistency over the board. But it would be nice, I guess, if the Elite League as a whole could get some sort of consistency across that. But it's not easy. It doesn't just take the Elite League. It takes BBC. It takes local reporters and so on. So, there is a bit more to it than meets the eye.
And Andy, anything that you want to sort of add regarding that question and Chris's comments? Because I'm struggling to relate it to either of you really. But if you've got anything you want to chip in on before I move on to another question.
No, I just think that there's, you know, I've seen the tweets that Chris is referring to, and I've seen Chris's responses on a few of them where people have almost shot the gun almost and saying, well, why is this not on the BBC website? And you know, if you actually look, and I appreciate that sometimes you do have to look hard, as Chris has said, but sometimes if you do look, you'll find that it invariably usually is. It's just sort of knowing where to find it, and you know, like Chris says, we are a minority sport, and no matter how big a result as beating Burn is or qualifying for the CHL or whatever, we are a minority sport. So unfortunately, with all the, you know, the way that the media works and the way that news works these days, is, you know, no sooner is it breaking news, it's gone off the front page because something else has overtaken it. So realistically, even if we were on the main homepage for our triumph or you know whatever, realistically, how long would we have been there for before it was taken off anyway? You know, we're far better off keeping it in my opinion, it's far better off being kept in its usual place where people know where to look and where to find it. And yes, it would be nice to be front page news, but unfortunately, with all the other sports that are a lot more popular and stuff like that, we're never going to be. So I kind of think that, you know, for now we have to accept where we are, and it's small steps. Mm-hmm. You know, and I just think that, you know, the coverage that we do get when we are on things like, you know, the local news programs and the BBC websites and the radio and stuff, the coverage we do get is great, and it is to be applauded. But obviously, I just think that, you know, where we are as a sport in this country, you know, there's an awful lot more that needs to happen before we get to that, you know, front page of the BBC Sport app or website.
Okay, I think we'll just sort of branch off for a moment, and we'll have some Elite League sort of questions, if you will. Before I forget, I will come back to Chris Lavell's tweet, and I mean this is specifically directed in Chris's direction, but obviously I will bring Andy and Ant in as well if they wish to talk about it. So Chris asks Chris, do you feel Belfast suffer in regards to youngsters coming through, given our geographical location and the fact we only have one permanent ice pad in the whole of Ireland? And would you have any suggestions on how to progress kids from Northern Ireland given the lack of available ice?
Yeah, that's a good question and a really interesting one. I mean, yeah, there is a lack of ice in Belfast. Belfast has not traditionally been an ice hockey city. Saying that, I mean, I'm talking traditionally, thinking back to the I'm going to say good old days, but the old days, of the 80s, even before that. What I will say, if what Belfast have done in still what's a short space of time is remarkable, because they now are one of the best franchisees in the country. What they've done for the sport, the games that they've put on, the friendship for the Boston Bruins. I mean, that's phenomenal, and that's down to the people that work there. The people like Todd Coleman. It's been taken on by Steve Thornton. Mark Brooks, James Glover. There's just a couple there who I know and have worked at. So from the way they've grown their franchise is remarkable. But obviously the homegrown players are totally different now. I know they have a junior giants, but it's getting that development through, and I know they do work hard. I don't know much about it, but of course, they have, they got 2 rings, I think, unless I'm mistaken. I
believe the Giants have got they have got a practice rink.
Is it Dundonald? I think they go to.
I think
that's
so.
it.
Yeah.
That's the one. So you're competing against a country that it's got a lot, compared to Northern Ireland. So, I do think that they are at a disadvantage. What can they do? Spend money. I mean, Rob Stewart was heavily involved in the junior program. Again, whether he still is, I'm not sure, because my links with the Elite League aren't as strong as they were a few years ago. But do they? They clearly do have development programs in place, but they've got a much smaller catchment area to sort of choose from, and a smaller country to work from. So yeah, I think they are at a disadvantage in that sense in developing players. Obviously, bringing players to the Belfast is massive, because everyone loves Northern Ireland, everyone loves going to Belfast, and they've got some great links with North America, and you can see that the import players that go over there, it's very easy to be attracted to Belfast. But yeah, they are at a tougher spot, but probably for someone with a more coaching and development mind, way more than me to really answer that question, I guess.
Ant, anything that you might sort of have in terms of suggestions? I think we do sort of recognise the challenges that the Belfast Giants face in terms of development. But what can they do?
I don't know if there's anything more they can do, to be honest. They have done a hell of a lot, like Chris has said, in the short time that they've been a franchise, but they've also been nominated and rewarded as well for their part that the team has played in the whole divide in Ireland. They are an inclusive team, which I think unfortunately will lead us not. I know there's been rumours of rinks being built in Dublin, which everybody then automatically jumps on the bandwagon saying, "Oh, we're going to get a Dublin Elite League team," and I can't ever see that happening, purely down to the role that Belfast have played in uniting that area of the country, which is brilliant stuff. They're, like you said, they're doing the Friendship 4. They've had the Bruins over. There's rumours of an NHL game being played there. Is it next year or the year after? It's one of the venues that's been mooted. So stuff like that Belfast are doing is really, really good. Now, what for me they need to do is, we all, tongue in cheek, take the mick out of the free pizza giveaways and stuff like that. But if those kids have a fantastic night on a free ticket and want to keep going back, that's how they'll build their fan base. And that, they have to sow the seeds first, and they're doing a lot with the community and everything. And that's, for me, they need to have a core established paying fan base of 4,000 or 5,000, I think, on average, and then build from there. I think that'll be their next step.
Andy, anything to add?
Well, I think one of the things that they will have to do is they'll have to do it in the near future because of the players that they've got. But I think they will have to invest quite heavily in British talent again. Obviously, if you think back to the times when they bought Shields across for the first time, and they took Mark Lever's offers, and obviously they bought Stephen Murphy in from Edinburgh, which to be honest as well was probably a bit of a gamble. Now I know Stephen Murphy has always been very good, but obviously he was always been very good, but still shipping in goals while he was in Edinburgh. So obviously it was a bit of a gamble going with a British netminder, and obviously we all remember David Sims' words of you won't win with a British netminder because the gulf is the gulf in quality is too great, and they really took a bit of a gamble there, but it paid off. And I think with players like Murphy and Shields, and even someone like Matt Toe, to be fair, who's been around for an awful long time, eventually they're going to have to reinvest in new young up and coming Brits, and ultimately they have to sell Belfast, which is a pretty easy sell, granted. But they also have to keep hold of them for seasons, like they have done with Shields and Murphy, and Craig Peacock for a fair while as well. Because obviously they do have a disadvantage in getting homegrown players, because of the pool size there. It's not conducive. There's not enough ice there. There's not enough. There's not enough infrastructure for junior, for lots of junior players to come through the ranks and make it into the pros. So, I think there will come a time in the not too distant future where they will have to look at sort of reinvesting relatively substantial money back into the market at British players, because Shields and Murphy and the like aren't going to be around for too much longer, much like us with David Clark.
Okay, we'll leave Belfast there. Thank you very much for your question, Chris. Again, if anybody wishes to get in touch with us, we are a fair way into the show, but you might just be able to catch us. So get on Twitter and tweet at Cats Whiskers TV with your question. Use the hashtag AskTCW. We'll jump around to another question regarding another Elite League team, and this has come from Joe Baum via our mucker Paul Baum, who can't be on the show tonight. Joe asks, why do people rate Mustakovs so highly? And I'm guessing this is on the back of him getting Player of the Week, Elite League Player of the Week this week. The tone of the question indicates that Joe doesn't. So, Ant, start us off.
Cheers.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't know, because I don't. Let's be blunt. I don't rate him. I never have done. Don't get me wrong. He can have his good games, but I don't think he's consistent enough for a team like Sheffield. Now the thing is with Sheffield, they will back their players as long as they're playing for the team. They'll do all they can for him. And we've already talked about it, talking about the game on Saturday, where Mustakovs, I don't think he had a good game, but his defence collapsed around him. They were anticipating the soft rebounds and stuff like that. So I think what Mustakovs does do well, because he knows the Steelers organisation, obviously Thompson knows how he plays, is that Thompson can build that defence around him. But if you put him in a brand new team, I think he'd get found out.
Chris,
sorry to be harsh, but
Chris, anything to add on this? I mean, obviously, you're a long-time Panthers fan, and I could be wrong in saying this, but I think in terms of the four of us, you are probably the elder statesman in terms of Panthers fan years. Long suffering and all that. You've seen a collection of Sheffield Steelers netminders through the years, and even reported on some of them in a media capacity. So. Mustakovs, give us your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they go back to him, so he does something right. And I'm with you guys. On the face of it, he doesn't look... I mean, let's take Saturday, for example. And you guys are spot on what you've said about him. I mean, the amount of poor rebounds you felt that he gave. I mean, sometimes I actually felt some of his rebounds were great. There's one which he managed to put out to the left winger who sped down the left wing and created a chance. But, I mean, we can all look at how many chances Panthers had on Saturday night. And there was so many times where that rebound came into an area where the puck could be for the Panthers, and I just felt they didn't drive the net well enough to get that rebound. Or maybe it was a combination of Sheffield, as you guys mentioned, clearing the zone and doing well around him. And you look for all that possession that Panthers had in the first period. It felt like men against boys at times, the way they got into the offensive zone and moved it around. But you never felt that Mustakovs was terribly troubled. You never felt how they had to be pulled out of position to make a good save. And that's where you perhaps have to question the Panthers' shooting. But they know that because you looked at them in their post-match interviews. But, but you can't deny that when it matters, Mustakovs delivers for them. And, he was in the playoff final, but they won the game. It might have been 6-5, 5-4 in the end. But they won the game. He was the netminder that won the playoffs for the Sheffield Steelers. What was it in his first stint? They won the Elite League, I think, back in 2011, something like that. And again,
netminder of the year as well.
Well, there you go. And people said, well, how's that? Well, how's that happening? And I'm just going now just to check the stats. Well, that year he got the stats are showing he got 2.32 goals against and a save percentage of 92.5. If you're looking at a netminder stats, you'd snatch your hands up with that at the start of the season. And yeah, I mean, we don't see him every week. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, comes into Nottingham. Perhaps he doesn't always have his best games, but Sheffield have gone back to him. He's won the big games for them, and they seem to love him here. I mean, I've got a few Sheffield friends, but it's a perception amongst their fan base that do they like him? I think they do. But it is one of those oddities, isn't it? Because you see him in the NIC. Maybe it's just his style. Maybe he's got that sort of style that doesn't make him look a confident netminder. But Sheffield have gone back to him, and as I say, he's won trophies for them.
I think you've actually got that bang on for me in the sense that he looks completely unconventional. He doesn't look like a really sort of smooth shot stopper, and he looks like he's constantly flapping. He looks like he's constantly struggling, but it works ultimately. Like you say, with the stats like he's got, you can't really grumble. And the fact is, no matter how bad you think he is, the last time we saw him play, he won the game. And we didn't. So no matter how bad he looks, he's still doing his job. And like you say, Chris, you listen to the fans' reaction at the NIC when he makes the saves. They're all there shouting moose, and they're all singing and shouting his name. He's obviously doing something right for the people who see him week in, week out. So ultimately, whilst I agree that he doesn't, if he was my netminder, he wouldn't fill me with confidence. But by the same token, if he keeps winning games and they keep winning trophies, and he keeps winning netminder of the year awards, then what does it matter if he looks slightly different or flappy and unconventional to everybody else?
Okay, so we will move on to a question closer to home, and one that I think is going to give us a little bit of consternation, perhaps. Paul Lister has asked, "How do you solve a problem like the Panthers' power play?" I don't even know who to go to first, because I think we've had a fair amount of discussion about where we are in the power play standings.
I'll go first if you want.
Go on, crack on, Andy. You crack on.
I think a lot of it is, for me, is down to the actual puck movement before we get to the shot. I think it needs to be quicker, and I think it needs to be crisper. And I'd like to think that the longer these people play with each other, on lines together and on power play units together, that eventually it will start to come good. I think realistically we've got, in my opinion, roughly the right personnel out there. There's a couple of times where I sort of think like perhaps the wrong guys doing the wrong thing at times. There was an instance where I think it was in the Sheffield game where Bussieras was sort of being the transition guy, where, you know, realistically I'd have preferred to have seen, I think Spang was on the ice at the time. I'd have preferred to see someone like Spang there with Bussieras using his body and his strength to sort of create some space and then eventually get in front of the net. But I think realistically we've probably got the right guys out there at the times. I just think that, I think at the moment we're guilty of overplaying it, and I don't think that's just on the power play. I think that's generally. But I do think that when it comes to having the man advantage and having the extra guy, I think we've seen far too often so far this season, you know, a pass that's been slightly into somebody's skates, or it's not been there for the one-timer, or the players having to take a touch and set themselves before they can get the shot away. And by that time, you know, the chances have gone. So I personally think that a lot of it is to do with the puck movement before we get to the sort of the scoring opportunities and the shooting chances. And I would like to think that they will get ironed out sort of as the season goes on, as these players become more comfortable and more sort of adept with each other.
Ant, anything you want to add to that?
Well, once again, Andy has taken the words out of my mouth. We are. That's my thoughts as well. I think we are guilty of overplaying it a bit too much. I've said on previous podcasts, I think maybe we need to get a bit more direct when it comes to playing in the Elite League. You know, I'm not talking about dumping the puck at every opportunity. I mean, let's get some shots on goals, but then crash the net. Expect the rebound. Don't go too far and go straight into the goalies. We'll leave that for somebody else to do. You know, but maintain a presence at the net. You know, like on Saturday, if we'd had one or two bodies around Mustakovs, we'd have scored a hatful because of the amount of soft rebounds he gave up. But we didn't, and the defence were able to clear. So, yes, I think we need to like be a little bit more simpler when it comes to, you know, choosing our passing lanes and what have you. But the one thing I will say, this season's team over the last couple, the one thing that frustrated me the most over the last couple was you'd see the pass go to the player as if they were that player that was receiving the pass was actually playing with the other hand. So you'd get a pass to the player who's right-handed playing, you know, as if he was left-handed and so on and so forth. So the fact that we're passing to skates now is a bit of an improvement.
Chris, I'll put a slightly different slant on the question for you. You've had the pleasure of covering the Panthers, you know, in a media sense as well as a fan sense, and I mean, I think I'm the newest Panthers fan, but already I am sort of aware of general rumblings about how our power play has been a bit below par in general. You know, we've had flashes of brilliance and seasons where we've been really good. I mean, you know, just take the league winning season, for example, obviously, where, you know, it was mind-blowing. But, you know, there does seem to be a general feeling that the Panthers' power play is a little bit... well, not as good as it probably should be or could be. I mean, in your experience, would you say so? Would you agree with that, or, you know, do you have a slightly different view on that?
Well, yeah. I mean, the problem is I'm getting older. My memory fades now, and all the years roll into one. So, but yeah, you mentioned that Grand Slam / treble winning, depending which way you want to look at it. That year, and that was exceptional. I'm sure there was at one point in the season, it may not have been the whole season. It might have covered just a 10 or 20 game span. But I remember Doug Christensen coming out in the media saying something like Panthers power play was at something scary like 30%. And obviously that's something that they would dream of at the moment. I mean, I've got my second ice hockey team, Ottawa Senators, in the NHL. I think 3 games in, we're 0 for 14. And I'm looking around in the Ottawa media online, and that's a big talking point. It's amazing how these things are a big talking point. But I mean, I don't really want to. I'm going to sit on the fence a bit here, but I'm a layman when it comes to hockey. I mean, okay, I might report on what I see, but I've never played the game. And obviously I have an opinion, but Corey Nielsen, I'm sure, is putting his hair out about their inability to score on the power play. But again, maybe as a whole, just kind of, my point really about the team as a whole, and I will kind of direct away slightly, is this sort of transition. I saw one fan. Again, it might have been to a tweet about Panthers winning in the CHL, and they said that they spent most of the game frustrated because they were angry that we couldn't do it in the league. The team was great in history, and this person says they were angry, and it was like, but I understand why people would look and think, well, hang on, if they can beat Bern, why can't they beat Braehead at home, who seem to be losing to everybody at the moment? But you look at this talent, there is no doubt it's an exceptional roster. I'm going too far as to say it could be better than the one that won the trophies, the Grand Slam / treble win season. There were some scary, talented players on there, and when they've played in the CHL, they get more time on the puck. It's a very different game. It's not so much of crash and bang as the Elite League. There's more of that, and I just think the players probably just need to adapt to that, and it's not going to get any easier. They're going to have to go to Fife on a Sunday night, and maybe Edinburgh on a Sunday night, and maybe Dundee on a Tuesday, perhaps a small rink like Coventry. So it won't get any easier for them, but these guys that we're watching have got some serious talent. You only need to see what Schaller's done in the CHL, and it's amazing because we're all these games in, and I've not seen many calls for many players to go.
Yeah, we normally have by now, haven't we? We've normally had to get him out, send him home. He'll be gone by Christmas.
Delego, people are saying they want more from, but you can see he's got the talent. Whereas last year, I mean, it was hard to watch, wasn't it, at times? It's night and day from last year. So, I think their performances will pick up domestically. I'm not going to stick my head up and say they'll win the league, because one year I did say that. I had Dave Sims ring me at 3 a.m. from Belfast when Sheffield had won the league. I think actually the next night the team played drunk in Nottingham and still managed to win against Nottingham many years ago. So I'm not going to stick out my neck out and say Nottingham will win the league, but they are going to make a hell of a challenge. And I think once these players adapt fully to the Elite League, that power play will come, I think, and that will go hand in hand.
Well, that's sort of similar to what you've been saying, isn't it, Andy? God help the team that we play against when it finally does click.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you look at the chances we've created in these games that we've played. I've said to you guys before that there will come a time where things will just all fall into place in one game, and I will genuinely feel sorry for the team that it happens against, because there will be teams that have gone away with victories, a la Sheffield on Saturday, where we've had the same amount of chances, we've had similar chances, but we've not been able to score them. But one day we will have similar chances in a similar style of game, and we'll put away 7 or 8. You can see it in this team, with the quality that we've got, like Chris says. And I think, just very quickly, I seem to remember that season, the power play, obviously, it wasn't. I don't think it was at 30% of the whole year, but I do have a feeling it was sort of at the end of the season, it was between sort of like 22 and 25%, which is absolutely staggering. I mean, that's
it is
scary.
Good. It is good.
But obviously, again, there was watching yesterday's game. Turku's power play was like 4%. Before yesterday, obviously. But going into the game after 5 games in the CHL, they were at 4%. So obviously it is frustrating and it is annoying, because you sort of think, well, there's one less person out there that you have to play against. How is it such a struggle to score? But obviously it is, with Ottawa, with Turku and with ourselves, it is a worldwide thing for some teams. It's not necessarily, it's not like we're a strange anomaly that, we just can't seem to do the power play. There are systems that work well against certain power play styles, and there are systems that don't. And, I think ultimately that just tweaking it here and there ever so slightly, and just being a bit more patient, the players, that is, not necessarily the fans, but the players being a bit more patient with their plays and making better passes, I think ultimately you'll have a completely different picture, and people won't have the concerns with the power play. I'm not saying that all of a sudden we'll go 100% with power play goals, but you certainly think that over the course of the season that we will start to steadily progress, in percentage.
Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more before we really should wrap it up. Before before we just get into really meaty questions and it all goes horribly wrong. Anyway, we'll get into a lengthy one now. It's coming from James Buckle. Buckle up, because it's quite a lengthy one. He says, do you think Team GB will ever head into a major tournament with only Indigenous players? And if so, how would they fare against comparable nations? Should they ever use proper Indigenous players? What are the pros and cons of including or excluding non-Indigenous? So, obviously the most recent example is one Evan Mosey playing for Team GB. Chris, kick us off. You're Mr. Team GB. Yeah. You kick us off with that one.
Well, they did in 2013 and 2014. We had a team of GB players. There was no dual nationals for that phrase. So there was 2 years more recently than people perhaps remember. But I have a very strong, a sort of forthright view. If the so-called dual national makes Great Britain better, then yes, they should go. And I like what Pete Russell's done, because he's looked at the roster and looked what he felt he's needed. And in the last few years, he's introduced Evan Mosey and Brendan Brooks, and both of them were exceptional for different reasons last year in Belfast. Those 5 performances from GB were the most complete 5 performances I've seen from GB and from any team, in ice hockey. They were just sensational from front to back nearly every single night, and they took what was thrown at them. But yeah, if the coach doesn't think that having player X makes his squad any better, if he's just doing it to fill numbers, then no, don't take them. But these guys have got British passports, and so yeah, and the bottom line to me is, does Evan Mosey make Great Britain a better team? Yes, he does. Absolutely. His speed was phenomenal in Belfast, and a couple of goals he scored were sensational. Brendan Brooks as well was he's perhaps not as flashy as other players, but he fitted the system that Pete Russell wanted to play. You'd expect them both to be very. I expect them both to go to the tournament next year. Will someone else become available for Great Britain? Off the top of my head, I can't think of a dual national. Brett Pelini suddenly is very available. He won't have a playoffs in the East Coast or something, so he'll make Great Britain better. But of course, he's a British player. He was born in Guildford. But yeah, if the bottom line is, if those players make GB better, then absolutely they go, in my opinion.
Ant, what's your feelings on dual nationals?
I'm very similar to Chris in that I want the best team available. So if that means using dual nationals, so be it. You only have to look at the Italians. At one point they were stacked full of North Americans who just happened to have an Italian passport. So
and Croatia.
Yeah.
Jeff Warren.
Wasn't that sort of partly responsible for Germany being so high up in the standings? I think they had a fair few dual nationals at one point, mainly Canadians, I believe.
It's one of them things. We're not the only sport that does it. You look at the cricket, you look at the rugby. It's not like it's a strange thing. You will always get people who disagree with it, and you will always get people who don't see what the issue is. I'm a big rugby fan. I don't see what the issue is in having dual nationals in your squad, so long as they make you better. It gives you options. It gives you a greater grasp of experience. But I know it's going off in a bit of a tangent here, but it still blows my mind that obviously, as we mentioned, Pellini will be classed as Indigenous because he was born in Guildford, and obviously he is a Brit, and yet you have someone like Liam Stewart, who is classed as an import in this league, which is mental. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I appreciate the logic behind it, in the sense that when a player becomes a dual national, you go back 10 years, and you sort of think that there's a chance that all of a sudden players like Rod Sarich, Corey Nielsen, Nathan Rempel, going back further, all of a sudden they become British players in the league, and all of a sudden you get teams stacking themselves full of these British players and then imports, and all of a sudden the league gets weighted out of control, and it all goes crazy. So I get the reasonings behind it, but I just think with the things like the Liam Stewart situation, it's amazing to think that he's classed as an import, and yet someone like Pellini, and I appreciate the rules, and I know why it's done, but Pellini is classed as a Brit. Now, like Chris says, you would imagine that he will walk into the GB squad in April, so long as he's still here, which I obviously have fully expected him to be. He will walk into it, and rightly so. But I imagine there'll be people that won't be not impressed or unimpressed, but there'll be people who see that as being slightly. Despite the fact that he is Indigenous, there will be people that won't necessarily agree with it, and ultimately you can't please them all, so you just have to do what's best for your team. And if adding 2, 3, 4, 5 of these players makes your team better, makes them compete, then I don't see what the issue is. And as discussed, a lot of these teams that we're playing, and a lot of the teams that we've played already, are doing the same thing, anyway. So it's horses for courses, and you've got to pick the best team that's available to you. That is Pete Russell's job. He has to pick the best GB squad to compete, and if that means picking Brendan Brooks and Evan Mosey, then so be it.
I mean, Evan's slightly different because his family are British, aren't they? They
exactly.
are from here. So you just have to look what Jack Charlton did for the Republic of Ireland in the 90s. It's basically if you flew over Ireland and happened to drink a pint of Guinness one time, you were eligible to play.
Well, wasn't the? I'm struggling to remember his name, but back in the days when I actually watched football, there was an Everton footballer, and I cannot remember his name for the life of me. But oh no, I can. It's just come to me. Danny Cadmarteri. He was eligible to play for something like 8 different nations because of the various passports that his parents and grandparents held. It was bonkers, and I genuinely don't know if he ended up playing for any of them. One of them was England, but yeah, I've no idea. But he could have had his pick. If any one of those like 8, 9 nations, whatever it was, could rung him up and said, "Would you like to come and play for the national team?" And he was playing in England at the time, as I say, with Everton, and any one of them could have rung him up and just said, "Oh, you're eligible. Do you want to come and play for us?" And if he thought, "Well, I'm not going to get in the England team, so yeah, why not?" He could have done it, which that was a little bit of an odd one. I just wanted to sort of jump in on this. I would like. I'm with all of you on this. You pick the best of what's available, but I would like to think that at some point in the future we might be able to get to a position where our Brits are as good as or better than the imports in the whatever is the top league in Britain. I'd like to think that there'll be a time where our Brits get to such a level that they can compete with the top hockey nations in the world. But whether or not we get there is another story. And until we do get there, pick what's available. Pick the best team that's available. Pick the team that is going to, improve the prospects of the Great Britain ice hockey team, I would say. Anybody else want to jump in on that before we move on to our last question of the evening? No. Okay. Right. We'll finish this one off with a question from Tim Swift. Now, it's sort of been specifically directed at Chris, and I will let you have the last word on this, actually, Chris. But in order of how long you've been watching, we'll sort of turn the question around, because Tim's actual question was, how have things in UK hockey changed for Chris since his early BBC Nottingham days? Now, we do have varying years' worth of support between us. So, Ant, I believe of the three of you guys, you are the newest Panthers fan. What would you say has changed, broadly speaking, from when you first started watching?
You see, when I started watching, there was a highlight show on Sky Sports, so. So that's kind of got worse. We don't have a TV deal anymore. I think the biggest thing I see is the crowds. The crowds have increased up and down the country. I mean, when I started, if you think about it, you were lucky to get 1,500, 2,000 to a game against Basingstoke. Basingstoke would turn up with 3 men, a dog, and then some poor lad that they put in nets. We don't get that anymore. Even with Edinburgh's troubles in the latter parts of the last couple of seasons, they've still come with a decent squad of players. So probably those two things stand out for me. And the crowds are going up. It's much harder to get a ticket for the play. My first playoff final, me and my mate bought tickets the week before, rocked up. We sat in a mixed block. Panthers weren't playing, but we had a cracking time. Didn't know anybody there. Whereas now, you've got people camping out the night before to get tickets on release date. So the crowds have gone up, and plus we're not seeing teams come up with just like 3 players anymore.
Andy, you have been watching since you were a boy, so I think you've got the next longest in years of service, as it were, watching the Panthers. What for you would you say is the most recognisable change in your years of watching?
Teams. For me, it's hands down teams. I mean, I've been through my period of watching hockey. I've been through probably a golden era, shall we say, of seeing so many different teams in the top league, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But I think the difference between when I first started to where we are now is obviously the quality is probably not quite as good, although it's getting very close. And obviously, at the time, I probably didn't appreciate it quite as much because I'd have been, 10. But what I do know and what I do remember is that the second season that I started going, we ended the season with 5 teams. Teams dropped out halfway through, and I think we only started with 7 or 6 or 7 anyway, and we ended up with 5. And that's how the season finished. So the fact that we've now got 12 teams in this league, is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. Because, like I say, my second year was the sort of the demise of the ISL, and there was rumours and talk about that there might not be a league, and obviously the EIHL was formed, and it's it's had its ups and downs, but I think overall it has got stronger and stronger as the seasons have gone on. So I would say that the amount of teams that I've seen, I feel like I've been quite lucky. I think that's been one of the things. You think back to, as Chris said, with Bracknell in the league and Basingstoke and Newcastle and Hull and all that. Manchester Phoenix, Manchester Storm originally. I've been lucky to have been to a lot of rinks and watched a lot of hockey in a lot of different cities. But I think overall, for the benefit of the league and for the benefit of the fans, I think And I think that plays into the crowds as well, because obviously, because there are more teams now, I think that helps, because, we moan about how many times we play Sheffield in a season. But, if there was only 5 teams in the league, just imagine how many more times we would play them. So it's, I think that has helped in sort of raising crowds as well, because I just think that, we see a bit of variety. So I would definitely say that the amount of teams and the different types of teams would be the biggest sort of difference from when I first started to where we are now.
And Chris, I said I was going to give you the last word. The question sort of specifically references your early BBC Nottingham days, but I would be interested to know, what you would feel about this question in terms of being a Panthers fan and also being a media correspondent for the Panthers. So give us both perspectives.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked this question, because I'll try not to go off on too many tangents. But in terms of the way UK hockey's changed, it is so much more professional now, and it gets more professional year on year. By a long shot, I don't agree with everything the Elite League do, and the system now where of effectively the owners kind of run the league without any chief executive. Is it ideal? I don't think it is, but again, I see fans get angry that Tony Smith's the chairman. There's Sheffield bias. He's a chairman to chair meetings. He literally is the chairman to chair meetings where all the clubs gets a vote. So it's great democracy. It's fantastic. Maybe it'd be better if it was someone independent, but it's not at the moment, and that's the way it is. And again, I've from the inside in the past and now looking on, he just sits there and chairs meetings. Gets rolled out for a quote or two. But all those owners, now 12 owners, GMs, they all have a say in the running of the league. But the way that, I think one of you guys, was it Andy, might have mentioned it earlier, Edinburgh turning up with 3 lads, a dog and, 2 sticks. Teams used to share sticks. You would watch some of those teams coming off the ice and they used to share sticks. We've come a long way since those days. And it was a slow start. The big exciting Super League went bust when TV companies, would pay for the ice hockey. And, the people, those owners who formed the Elite League, along with people like Eamon Convery, who people have forgotten about, Andy French, they probably saved British ice hockey when they went to the Elite League. What was it in the first year? 10 imports, 9 imports? A lot of British players. That's where people like David Clark and at the time Mark Levers, Paul Moran, they were the Panthers British players. And some of them have gone on to be superstars and across the league. You remember London folded and Mark Thomas and Jason Hewitt went to Sheffield, but London folded. There was a big thing about Blas Emisit getting nearly his eye cut on a rusty nail. We've come so far since then. But it's different. It's not this razzmatazz Super League era where people are going to pay for TV deals. And, my personal opinion, I think we should be on TV once a month, like there was a Sky Sports deal. I think that was good for the Elite League and a highlight show. But if you want to get it on these bigger channels like Sky Sports, it's a cost implication. And I guess the Elite, again, I'm not privy to decisions, but I think the Elite League are comfortable with where they are now. I don't think across the board the owners perhaps all agree 100%. Again, I don't really know these days who thinks what, but I think it would be good if we could have some sort of TV deals. But as I mentioned in an earlier answer, the BBC showed the playoffs last year. They showed the Challenge Cup. So, perhaps they're not getting out there on the regularity, but they are getting out there, for the big occasions. And then just the couple more things, GB, I hear stories before I got involved, many years before. The players used to travel around in the back of minibuses, vans. They weren't treated like the international players that they were, which was wrong. And again, it was a different era. It was maybe different money involved, different people. And now, of course, that, and again, I got to lay a lot of tribute, especially in this current era, to the people like Andy Buxton and a lot of the staff that he has working around him who have made GB one of the most professional outfits when they, Andy makes sure the players want for nothing. They know where they are. It's almost like they're told when to go to the toilet. I'm taking that to the extreme, but you should see his itineraries. The players get sent every day, but they are treated like professionals. They have 2 physios. They have a doctor on hand for their needs 24/7. And just from a media point of view, again, led by Dave Sims in the early days and Jeff Foster from BBC Coventry and Warwickshire, before them, you didn't know about GB, but Andy Buxton introduced that, and then I took it on in later stages, and I say I'm lucky enough to get people. I mean, these people don't work for free, but they're serious professional people. Dave Burnham, who does the video, like I said, the photographers like Carl Denham and Dean Woolley. I'm great that I've got the help of someone like Craig Simpson, who works in so many different aspects of media. He's done announcing for Durham. He's done announcing in Newcastle. That guy works tirelessly for no reward. He does it for the love. But we're very lucky to get these professional people and that just bring up the level of GB from where it was years ago. And I say not just on the ice, but off the ice. And then, when I first saw this question, I kind of read it really about how the media had changed. And the fascinating thing is when I first started at Radio Nottingham, where did people get their content? And if you wanted to hear from the Panthers coach, so in that day, Alex Dampier, followed by Paul Adey and so on, you really had to tune into Radio Nottingham in the morning or on the power play feature. And if you really wanted to read about it, it was on the by your Nottingham Evening Post. But what's amazing now is I'm not saying that there's no need for those medias, because they are a massive thing in publicising the sort of word of these local Panthers, Steelers, or be it what you will. But now, and this is what we're doing, a prime example. Who would have thought 10 years ago we'd be sitting here on the internet talking amongst ourselves, getting out to lots of people. You can only see by the people that listen and email the show. So people can listen to us from all across the world. So that's how I kind of first read the question. And the fascinating thing is how the whole way that people can get their content, they can get it in so many different ways, and I think that's just helping grow the sport. There's so many different ways from podcasts. How many podcasts are there in the league now? So many, whether it be this one, written ones. There was the ones that obviously you guys did when it was filmed on, and so on. And it's come so far in the last 5 or 6 years. And I say the sport as a whole is so professional. Have they still got things that they can improve? Of course they have. But from where we were, as I say, in the days where you watch Edinburgh share a stick, it's night and day. And with the introduction of the Champions League and the standing that Great Britain have now got, help hugely. I mean, people won't realise how big a result this is for the Panthers and what they have done to their standing and the British standing in the world ice hockey. People will take notice of that. This is going to help not only Panthers attract players, this is going to help other teams attract players, because they're going to go, hang on a minute, this league ain't, lots of players have admitted that they thought it was just a beer league. They thought it was for laughs. And you know what? Maybe 8 years ago it was. Maybe some of the imports came over and they took it as a bit of as a laugh, and they saw it as just a way to have a beer and maybe travel the world. But now, you don't see that. The clubs, they've got dietitians, they've got doctors, they've got specialist coaches, fitness coaches, and it's night and day. And I've been rambling here, but the change between where it was and now is huge. Okie dokie. Sorry if I've bored you there.
No, don't be daft. Don't be daft. It's always it's mind blowing. I mean, for me personally, the newest fan on the board. I don't remember anything like this because I wasn't a fan back then. So I find it fascinating to sort of get these little snippets of stories from you guys, and it's days like this I get jealous of all of you for having had these experiences. So I think we'll leave it there. We have probably gone on, so this is a bit of an extended show. Not a bad thing though, because this for me it's been absolutely fascinating to listen to all the opinions once again. So Yes, we'll leave it there, and we will be back again on Monday with our review podcast, reviewing the Sheffield away game and the Belfast at home. And unless they change their minds between then and now, I believe there is a webcast for the Sheffield game on Saturday. Brilliant quality webcast. So if you are not able to travel, then it's definitely worth a few quid. Get your support any way you can. Get yourself down to the NIC on Sunday for a 4 p.m. face-off against the Belfast Giants. We will be back again, as I say, with our review of those two games on Monday. And so all that there is left for me to say is thank you very much to Andy Haywood.
Anytime, no worries at all.
Antoine Marie-Jeanne.
No problem, thanks for having me. And don't forget the Champions Hockey League draw on Friday, where a certain team from Nottingham could be going to be drawn out. Who would have thought we were saying that 2 months ago? Yes,
indeed. Thank you very much for the reminder there, Ant. It's 11 a.m. UK time on Friday. That'll be live on Free Sports, I believe. I think we'll all be sort of sat there wondering where we're booking our plane tickets to. Final word of the night. Thank you very, very much to our special guest panellist this evening, Chris Ellis.
Yeah, my pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful stuff. Hope to have you on again at some point, Chris. It's been a while in the making, so now that you know what the standard is, hopefully you'll not be too worried next time. Right. Thank you very much, and we will see you on Monday.